A black CEO in disguise was refused a room at his own hotel 9 minutes later. He fired the entire staff. James Mitchell had built his life on discipline, strategy, and quiet determination. At 42, he wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a symbol of what resilience could look like when paired with intellect and vision. After earning his MBA from Harvard, he founded 3 companies that each became industry leaders before he turned 40. His net worth had crossed the $500 million mark long before most people paid off their student loans. But James wasn't one to flaunt wealth. He believed the true measure of success wasn't in luxury cars or lavish parties. It was in the legacy you left behind. 8 months earlier, he had purchased one of Boston's most prestigious landmarks, the Grand Riverside Hotel. The deal had cost him $280 million, but to him it was more than a business move. The Grand Riverside represented tradition, elegance, and influence. Owning it was his way of reclaiming a narrative that had, for too long, excluded people who looked like him. He wanted this hotel to be a place where professionalism and dignity were inseparable, where every guest, no matter their background, felt respected. That vision drove him constantly. Between meetings, international flights, and sleepless nights, James pushed himself to ensure the Grand Riverside lived up to its reputation. He hired the best hospitality experts, launched new training programs, and even scheduled surprise audits to see how his guests were treated when no one was watching. He wanted excellence, not just in service, but in humanity. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. It was the kind of dedication that demanded everything. And that night, after a 14-hour flight from Tokyo, James was running on fumes. His jet lag blurred the edges of his thoughts, and his eyes burned from exhaustion. The private driver had offered to take him straight home, but James decided otherwise. He wanted to check into his own hotel quietly, like any other guest. No announcements, no fanfare, just an honest look at how his staff handled the people they were paid to serve. He arrived at the Grand Riverside just before midnight. The streets outside were slick with rain, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement like scattered diamonds. The lobby glowed warm and inviting through the glass doors. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh lilies. The marble floor gleamed under the chandeliers he had personally approved during the renovation. It was a place designed to impress but also to welcome. James walked in wearing a simple gray sweatshirt and a pair of sneakers that had seen better days. His backpack carried nothing but a laptop, a few documents, and the fatigue of travel. No security guards were trailing him, no staff greeting him by name. For once, he was invisible, and he liked it that way. Across the lobby, an elderly couple sat quietly on a leather sofa, whispering to each other. Behind the reception desk, a young woman scrolled through her phone, half aware of her surroundings. Her name tag read, Emily. When she finally looked up, her expression shifted. Her eyes flicked over his outfit, his shoes, and his tired face. In that brief moment, James saw it, the silent calculation, the assumption, the unspoken judgment. It wasn't new to him. He had seen that look too many times before. Still, he stayed calm. He approached the counter, polite and composed, and handed her his reservation confirmation. She barely looked at it before calling for the night manager. That small act, so routine and harmless on the surface, carried a tension that would soon unravel the entire night. As James waited, he took in the space around him. The soft jazz playing through hidden speakers, the distant hum of an elevator, the faint echo of laughter from the hotel bar. Everything about the Grand Riverside reflected refinement. Yet beneath that surface, he could feel something else, the fragile divide between perception and reality. It wasn't the first time James had tested his own staff incognito. He had done it before at other properties, sometimes greeted with professionalism, other times with prejudice. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was his exhaustion, Or maybe it was the quiet confidence that came from owning every inch of the place he stood in. Either way, he didn't expect what was about to happen next. As minutes passed, the night manager arrived. A man in his 30s with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. The tone of the lobby shifted. The air thickened with unspoken tension. James noticed the small glances between the two employees, the kind of shared look that carried assumption and doubt. He could have revealed himself right then and ended the game before it began. But he didn't. He wanted to see the truth, unfiltered and unguarded. He wanted to witness how easily dignity could be dismissed when someone didn't fit the image of wealth. Behind him, the elevator chimed softly. The elderly couple glanced up, sensing the unease. Something in their faces said they knew what was about to unfold. James, however, stood still, silent, patient, and observant. He had walked into his own hotel expecting to rest. Instead, he was about to uncover how fragile respect could be when it depended on appearance. What happened in the next few minutes would expose not just a few employees, but an entire system built on quiet bias. And by the end of that night, the Grand Riverside Hotel, and everyone in it, would never be the same again. The night manager's name was Brad Turner. His confidence walked into the room before he did. He adjusted his tie, glanced at James, and smirked as if the situation amused him. To him, this was a simple equation. The wrong clothes, the wrong face at the wrong place. James stood quietly while Brad leaned against the counter, tapping a pen. Emily handed him the printed reservation confirmation. He looked at it for less than 2 seconds before sliding it back. "Our suites start at $1,600 a night," he said flatly, his tone carrying disbelief. It wasn't a question, it was a challenge. James nodded once, expression calm. He didn't need to defend himself. But Brad's voice grew sharper. "Maybe you're looking for something more affordable. There's a motel 2 blocks down." Emily stifled a laugh. Her eyes darted to the elderly couple across the lobby, as if to make sure they had an audience. The couple, Henry and Margaret Cole, exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't sure what was happening, but something in the air felt wrong. James reached into his backpack and pulled out his phone, showing his confirmation email. The logo of the Grand Riverside shimmered on the screen, time-stamped and verified. But Brad barely glanced at it. "Anyone can fake an email," he muttered. "You'd be surprised how many people try this for clicks these days." That line lingered like a slap. He wasn't just doubting a customer, he was ridiculing him. The arrogance in his tone wasn't hidden, it was performed. Emily leaned closer and whispered something under her breath that made Brad smirk again. James stayed composed. Years of experience had taught him to let arrogance reveal itself. But what he didn't say was that every word, every tone was being recorded. His company's compliance system automatically synced audio when he entered any of his properties, a safeguard he had built for nights just like this one. The tension in the room was thick enough to feel. The soft jazz in the background suddenly seemed out of place, almost mocking. Henry Cole subtly lifted his phone, pretending to check a message, but his camera was rolling. He and his wife had seen enough to know this wasn't a misunderstanding. Brad turned his attention back to James. "Look," he said with forced patience. "I don't know what you're trying to pull, but this is a luxury property. We can't just hand out suites to anyone who walks in claiming to have a reservation." James looked at him evenly. "You can check the system," he said quietly. "You'll find it under my name." Brad shrugged. "I'd rather not waste time. The system's down right now." It wasn't. James knew it wasn't. He had received a report on operational uptime less than an hour earlier. But Brad wasn't interested in truth, he was interested in control. As the silence stretched, Rachel Nguyen, the guest service supervisor, walked in. She had just finished handling a late-night check-in upstairs when she noticed the tension in the lobby. Her eyes landed on James, and in an instant, recognition flashed across her face. She knew who he was. But James's subtle shake of the head told her to stay quiet. He wanted to see how far this would go. Brad turned to her, pretending authority. "Rachel, this gentleman's trying to check in, but his reservation doesn't seem legitimate." Rachel hesitated. "Did you verify it in the system?" Brad shot her a look. "I said it's down." Emily crossed her arms, now emboldened. "Maybe he's one of those activists trying to make a scene," she whispered. That whisper was loud enough for the Coles to hear. Henry's face tightened in disbelief. He kept filming. James's calm exterior began to harden into quiet resolve. He had built his companies on fairness and accountability, yet here he stood being treated as if he didn't belong in a place he owned. Every word, every glance, was a reminder of how bias hides behind politeness until it feels safe enough to surface. Brad picked up the phone, pretending to call corporate. He turned away slightly, lowering his voice, but not enough. "Yeah, I've got a guy here claiming he owns the place. No, seriously. Says he's got a reservation. Yeah, looks like one of those setups. I'll handle it." The smirk returned. The call was fake. He wasn't talking to anyone. For a moment, James felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not anger, but deep disappointment. This hotel was supposed to represent progress. Instead, it had become another mirror reflecting society's quiet prejudices. The Coles exchanged looks. Margaret whispered, "Should we step in?" Henry shook his head slightly. "Not yet." His phone kept recording. Then, almost casually, Brad added, "Sir, unless you can provide something more official, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." That was it. The line had been crossed. James set his backpack down gently on the polished floor and reached for his leather briefcase. Brad chuckled. "What now? You going to show me your mixtape?" The remark hung heavy in the air. Emily laughed, a nervous, uncertain laugh. Rachel's face went pale. James opened the briefcase and laid a folder on the counter. Inside, under the glow of the lobby lights, were signed documents bearing the words buyer, James Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Enterprises. The date, the transaction value, $280 million. All printed in black and white. For a second, no one moved. Then Brad's smirk cracked. The confidence drained from his face. Emily's mouth fell open. Rachel stepped forward. "It's real," she said quietly. "He owns the Grand Riverside." The silence that followed felt endless. Henry lowered his phone slowly. Margaret covered her mouth. Brad stammered, searching for words, but his voice trembled. I didn't know." James met his eyes. Calm, steady. "Now you do." And at that moment, everything shifted. The power balance, the certainty, the illusion of control, all of it crumbled. What no one yet realized was that this wasn't just a humiliating encounter. It was the start of something bigger. The incident would ripple far beyond that marble lobby. And before sunrise, it would reach the company's headquarters, the press, and the courts. But right then, in those breathless minutes between arrogance and accountability, the truth finally stood unmasked, and there was no going back. The lobby was frozen in silence. The marble floor, the soft music, the scent of lilies. Everything suddenly felt hollow. Emily stood pale and motionless, staring at the documents spread before her. Brad's mouth opened, then closed again, like words might save him if only he could find the right ones. But nothing came. James didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority radiated from him in a quiet, undeniable way. "Call the corporate office," he said evenly. "They'll confirm the purchase." Brad hesitated, hoping for a loophole, but he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. With shaking hands, he picked up the phone and dialed. Each ring felt longer than the last. Then, a woman's voice on the other end, "Corporate Relations, Mitchell Enterprises." The name alone shattered any illusion that remained. Rachel, the guest service supervisor, stepped forward. Her tone was steady but low. "He's telling the truth. This is Mr. Mitchell. He's the owner." The color drained from Brad's face. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for the desk to steady herself. For a moment, no one moved. Then James reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. On the screen glowed a timer, 17 minutes and 32 seconds. The audio recording was still running, its data already uploaded to the company's secure servers. He looked at Brad, then Emily. "Every word," he said quietly, "is recorded." The elderly couple, Henry and Margaret Cole, stepped forward from the sofa. Henry raised his phone. "So is this," he said, voice calm but firm. "We have the whole thing on video." Brad looked like the ground had vanished beneath him. "You can't record. This is private property," he blurted. But his voice broke halfway through. James met his eyes. "Massachusetts is a one-party consent state." The words hit harder than any shout could. "Everything that happened here is legal evidence." Rachel's gaze hardened. She turned her tablet toward Brad and Emily, revealing internal complaint reports. There have been 19 guest complaints against Emily, 22 against Brad. Most involved racial bias. Her voice didn't waver. "I sent them to HR weeks ago." Brad's hands dropped to his sides. Emily covered her mouth, tears beginning to spill. The facade of professionalism was gone. The masks had cracked wide open. James didn't gloat. He didn't even look angry. He just looked tired of the repetition, of the way the same story played out in new places with different faces. "You both had a chance to treat someone with respect," he said quietly. "You chose to treat them with suspicion instead." Brad started to speak, but James cut him off with a single gesture. "You have 30 seconds, he said. "Resign and take a neutral reference, or face termination for cause." The words landed like a sentence. Emily's sobs filled the silence. Brad's jaw clenched, but his voice cracked when he finally spoke. "You can't." "Already done," James said softly. He turned his phone toward them. On the screen, an automated compliance notice confirmed that HR and legal had both received live alerts about the incident. The system doesn't wait for permission. It acts when policy is broken. Rachel watched as they fumbled for words neither of them could find. The Coles stood back, quietly recording the fallout, the proof that justice could sometimes wear the calmest face in the room. Henry stepped closer to James. "My daughter's a civil rights attorney," he said. "She'll want this video." James nodded once. "Send it to her." Brad tried one last time to defend himself. "We didn't mean anything by it." "You came in looking." "Looking how?" James asked. His tone was low but sharp enough to cut through the air. "Tired? Human?" No one answered. Emily's shoulders shook as she whispered an apology, but the sound barely carried. The damage was already done. James turned to Rachel. "File the report with HR tonight. Include the recordings and the witness statement." Rachel nodded. "It's already uploading." Outside, rain started tapping against the glass doors, the faint sound of thunder rolling in the distance. Inside, the atmosphere felt heavier, denser. The marble floors that once gleamed with elegance now reflected guilt and silence. Brad and Emily stood behind the counter, stripped of authority, their arrogance replaced by dread. They had believed they were untouchable, protected by uniforms and titles. But now, standing before the man they had humiliated, they realized those things had never shielded them from accountability, just delayed it. James looked around the lobby one last time. The chandeliers shimmered above him, the same lights that had greeted him when he walked in. Only now they seemed colder. He had built this place to be a symbol of respect and excellence. Instead, it had revealed the cracks still running through the foundation of society. He turned toward the elevators. Each step echoed like punctuation. The staff watched, silent, as the man they dismissed walked away not in anger, but with purpose. Just before the doors closed, James looked back at them. His voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. "Your biggest mistake wasn't ignorance," he said. "It was arrogance." The doors slid shut. For a few seconds, the lobby remained still. Then Rachel exhaled shakily, breaking the silence. Henry lowered his phone. Emily collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Brad stood frozen, realizing that his entire career had just ended in less than 9 minutes. Upstairs, as the elevator rose, James glanced at his reflection in the polished metal doors. He saw fatigue, yes, but also resolve. This night would not end in humiliation. It would end in reform. He reached for his phone and opened the internal audit dashboard. Dozens of properties were listed under his company's name. Tonight, he thought, would mark the beginning of something larger. Not revenge. Change. And as the elevator doors opened to the suite that was rightfully his, the storm outside broke. Rain lashing against the city like a cleansing, unstoppable truth. By the next morning, the story had already begun to spread. The Grand Riverside's internal alert system had forwarded the incident report to the company's legal and ethics departments before dawn. By noon, James's phone was flooded with calls from executives, attorneys, and reporters asking for statements. But he didn't want headlines. He wanted transformation. Within days, both Brad and Emily were officially terminated. Their resignations had been recorded, verified, and filed. The compliance system had done what it was built to do, document the truth. Yet for James, firing them wasn't the victory. It was only the beginning. The real win would be ensuring that no guest, anywhere in his hotels, would ever face what he had faced that night. Over the next 3 months, change rippled across the company. James launched a comprehensive program called the Guest Dignity Initiative. Every one of Mitchell Enterprises' 800 hotels adopted it. Staff training was redesigned from the ground up, focusing not only on service but on humanity. New digital tools allowed guests to report discrimination in real time, anonymously and securely. QR codes appeared on lobby walls, linking directly to independent auditors who could review interactions and issue immediate feedback. Cameras and microphones were added in common areas, not for punishment, but for protection. Every employee knew that fairness and transparency were now part of the brand's foundation. Respect wasn't a slogan anymore. It was policy. Rachel Nguyen, the supervisor who had recognized James but stayed silent until the right moment, was promoted to regional manager. Her composure that night had proven invaluable. As for Henry and Margaret Cole, the elderly couple who recorded everything, they became unlikely symbols of moral courage. They later returned to the Grand Riverside as honored guests. When they checked out, they left a simple note on their review. Finally, a place where respect isn't optional. The hotel's reputation rebounded faster than anyone expected. Its online rating climbed to 4.8 stars, and revenue rose by 43%. Guests spoke about how the hotel felt different, warmer, more genuine, more aware. What had begun as a scandal became a model for reform across the industry. Harvard Business School even added James's leadership response as a case study on ethics, accountability, and systemic change. Meanwhile, Brad and Emily faded quietly into the background. Brad picked up night shifts at a roadside motel outside the city, a stark contrast to the luxury lobby he once ruled. Emily found work answering calls at a discount travel agency. They weren't villains. They were symptoms of a deeper disease. A culture that equated appearance with worth and confidence with superiority. And now that illusion had collapsed. For James, the impact went far beyond business. That night had changed something in him. It reminded him that racism doesn't always shout. It often whispers. It hides behind professionalism, tone, and body language. It disguises itself as policy or procedure. And sometimes, it takes power to expose what politeness tries to hide. He thought of the millions of travelers who would never get the chance to prove who they were. the ones who would be turned away quietly, without an audience, without a phone recording the moment. He couldn't erase their experiences, but he could make sure the system protected them. That became his mission. The Guest Dignity Initiative grew beyond hotels. Other corporations reached out, asking to adopt similar audit models. Universities and nonprofits requested consultations. The incident that began as a moment of humiliation became a blueprint for justice rooted in accountability. When James revisited the Grand Riverside 3 months later, he walked through the same glass doors where everything had begun. The marble still gleamed, but the atmosphere felt lighter. Employees greeted guests with warmth, not judgment. Behind the counter, a young clerk smiled and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Mitchell," not because she recognized him as the owner, but because she saw him as a person. He paused in the center of the lobby, looking around at the place he had nearly lost faith in. Change was possible. Not perfect, not complete, but possible. And it began with one night, one moment of truth, and one decision to confront what others ignored. Before leaving, James looked up at the chandelier above him, the same one that had witnessed every second of that unforgettable night. It sparkled as brightly as ever, but now it reflected something new: accountability. He thought about how fragile dignity could be, and how easily it could be dismissed by people who believe power gives them the right to decide who belongs. But dignity, he knew, wasn't a luxury. It was a right. As he stepped back into the cold Boston air, he realized that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding systems that protect what arrogance destroys. He had done that, and though the world wouldn't change overnight, his hotel, had become proof that it could. Because real equality doesn't begin with laws or policies. It begins the moment someone chooses to see another person's humanity and refuses to look away. So the next time you walk into a place that measures people by their appearance, ask yourself, who really belongs there, the one who judges or the one who endures it with grace? What did you think of James's story? Was it justice or just the beginning of something bigger? Moments like this remind us that racism isn't always loud. It's often hidden in plain sight. If this story moved you or made you think differently, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take. And if you want more real, powerful stories like this one, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss what's coming next.